Welcome back to the channel where Fairmont Crest isn't just a luxurious community, but a labyrinth of secrets, where a single medical test report can be enough to shake an entire powerful family. Today, we're not talking about loud betrayals or schemes that reveal themselves right in front of our eyes, but a truth that is silent, icy, and far more dangerous. A negative result should have brought relief, yet instead it opens a door straight into suspicion, fear, and questions no one dares to answer. When bloodlines are no longer certain, when motherhood is placed under a question mark, and when the truth could destroy everything that was once believed to be eternal, what happens if this secret can no longer stay buried? Stay with us until the end, because today's story isn't only about Cot, it's about a truth that could leave Fairmont Crest forever changed. Cot's test results arrived on a morning that looked ordinary. In a moment when she should have felt relief, the line confirming she was negative for the BRCA gene appeared clear and merciless, carrying the promise of a future no longer haunted by the hereditary shadow her family had been trembling to confront. It should have felt like liberation, but just beneath that conclusion, buried in the technical data most people would skim past, there was a small detail, precise, factual, impossible to argue with, that made Cot's entire inner world collapse in silence. Her blood type was completely incompatible with both Nicole and Ted. Not a slight discrepancy, not a medical grey zone that could be explained away by rare probability, but an absolute exclusion. In that moment, Cot didn't feel anger, didn't feel resentment, didn't even panic the way people might imagine. What flooded her instead was a deep, cold fear, as if the foundation she had stood on her whole life had suddenly developed a fracture, too fine to see with the naked eye, yet large enough to destabilize everything. Cot clung to the possibility of error, because it was the only option that allowed her to keep breathing. The lab could be wrong. A file could be entered incorrectly. People make mistakes, especially inside huge healthcare systems, where data is processed in bulk. She repeated the hypothesis in her mind like a calming spell. But when the doubt refused to dissolve, Cot quietly went back to the doctor, no longer a patient waiting for results, but someone searching for denial. What she received was even colder than the original report. The procedure had been cross-checked multiple times, the blood sample verified. No sign of a mix-up, no room for uncertainty. Everything was correct. And it was that absolute correctness that felt most terrifying. From that moment on, Cot understood this was no longer simply about medicine, but about a secret powerful enough to destroy the entire family structure she had been trying to hold together at any cost. The thought of being switched at the hospital came first, not because it was the most logical, but because it was the only explanation that could preserve Nicole in the role of mother, the woman Cot had loved for her entire life. A systemic mistake, a chaotic night shift, two births to close together, a wristband placed on the wrong tiny arm. But the longer she turned that theory over in her head, the more it dragged darker questions behind it. Who would have a motive to do something like that if it wasn't an accident? Whether her biological records had ever been altered, replaced, or deliberately hidden, and if they had, who possessed enough power, enough connections, enough reason to manipulate a truth for decades without leaving a trace. Fairmont Crest had never lacked secrets buried beneath perfection, and Cot began to realize she might be part of those secrets. Only now, finally, they were bleeding through. When she returned home, Cot made her first decision that felt like betrayal. Even as she disguised it in the language of love, she hid everything about the blood type incompatibility and told Nicole only that she was BRCA negative. She saw the fragile relief in her mother's eyes, that rare flicker of light appearing in the middle of days, when Nicole was still trying to live normally under the pressure of Anita's cancer, and the tensions that had long been smoldering inside the family. Cot was afraid that, if she spoke, Nicole would not only face the fear of losing her child in a biological sense, she would lose the psychological ground that was keeping her steady. While Anita fought for her life, Cot didn't want to become one more source of pain. She also wasn't sure she could survive watching her mother crumble while carrying too many losses at once. Cott's silence quickly mutated into a kind of spiritual isolation. She loved Nicole more fiercely than ever, not with the carefree certainty of a child who believes that bond is guaranteed, but with the terror of losing a mother not only in body, but in meaning. Every gesture of care, every time Nicole tried to appear strong, made Cott feel both grateful and wounded. Alongside that love grew an obsession that refused to loosen its grip. Where this truth came from, when it began, and why it had landed in her hands at the exact moment the family was at its most fragile. Cott combed through memory, and suddenly the smallest childhood details looked different under the harsh light of suspicion. Old family stories, unspoken gaps, blurred timelines. She searched for records, for papers that once seemed harmless, and in that process she began to imagine possibilities she had never allowed herself to consider. Baby switching no longer felt like a distant, ridiculous theory. A secret buried for honor, for power, for some hidden benefit began to take shape like a shadow hovering overhead. Inside that fear, Cott briefly suspected someone had deliberately manipulated the records. The thought disgusted her, because it meant she was questioning an entire system and the people she had once trusted. She didn't know whether it was reality or simply imagination ignited by panic, but every time she tried to push it away, the unease returned stronger. The silence began to leave marks. Ted, with the instincts of a father, slowly noticed something wrong in his daughter. Small shifts in her demeanor, stretches of heavy quiet, the way her eyes slid away from his, none of it escaped his attention. Cott felt it, and withdrew even further, because any question from Ted could become a spark near the secret she was forcing herself to contain. The biggest question haunting Cott wasn't where she came from, but whether her silence was truly protecting Nicole or merely delaying a larger collapse. With Anita battling cancer, with the family leaning on each other just to survive, would exposing a truth capable of destroying the very concept of bloodline be the cruelest thing Cott could do? But if she didn't speak, would someone else speak for her? And if that happened in a hostile context, with the intent to manipulate or threaten, the consequences would be even more catastrophic. Names began rising in Cott's mind like unwelcome ghosts. Joey, Leslie, even Anita, people who had stood close to the Dupree family. People who understood the value of secrets and the power of information. If a switch had truly happened, had any of them known? And were they simply waiting for the right moment to use it as leverage? The thought of an unknown biological mother only deepened Cott's disorientation. If that woman was alive, living right inside Fairmont Crest, having lost a child and silently watched Cott from afar, then Cott's relationship with everyone around her would change forever. Familiar faces suddenly looked suspicious. Concern that once felt natural now carried a different color. Cott wondered whether she had stood near the truth many times without recognizing it. And if she found this biological mother, would it be liberation or the beginning of a new chain of betrayal? Because in a family where blood is tied to power and inheritance, redefining someone's origin is never purely personal. Gradually, Cott began to suspect this wasn't an isolated incident at all. The idea of a broader medical conspiracy, something that once happened at a hospital connected to the Dupree family, no longer felt like pure fantasy. If there had been systematic interference, then Cott was either one victim among many, or the most important link in a long-running design. And if she told the truth, who would lose everything? Nicole, with her faith in motherhood shattered. Ted, with his honor and his identity as a father called into question. Or Cott herself, who could lose the family she was trying to protect in exchange for a truth that might not bring peace at all. The more she thought, the more Cott felt she was standing at a crossroads with no right choice, only choices that hurt less in the short term while hiding long-term disaster. Underneath, and in that heavy silence, the biggest question still hovered, not just for Cott, but for all of Fairmont Crest. If this truth is exposed, who is truly behind it, and how many other secrets are still sleeping, waiting to be awakened?